She never saw it coming. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, a woman who once captivated the world with her grace, her charm, her daring independence, was suddenly facing a reality she had never anticipated. A reality that would shake the very foundation of her identity within the British royal family. Imagine being told, after years of living under the shadow of one of the most scrutinized institutions on the planet, that a part of who you are, your title, your rank, your very place in history, could be stripped away in an instant. How would you react? Panic, anger, disbelief? Or would you steel yourself, knowing that the eyes of millions, perhaps billions, are upon you? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all began with an announcement that seemed innocuous at first. Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, made a declaration that, on its surface, appeared to be a routine modernization of the monarchy. Yet beneath the polished words and poised smile was a seismic shift, one that targeted the very core of Meghan's royal existence. According to palace insiders, the announcement was simple. Henceforth, royal titles would only be held by those actively serving the crown. Meghan, already distanced from official duties, fell into a category that effectively rendered her title invalid. The words alone sent shockwaves through the palace, reverberating across media outlets worldwide, and ignited an emotional storm that no one, inside or outside the royal walls, was fully prepared for. Picture the scene: Buckingham Palace, a labyrinth of history and tradition, humming quietly in the early morning. Courtiers whispered in hallways, aides scurried through corridors clutching briefing notes, and senior royals convened behind closed doors, tension palpable. The announcement was not just a statement. It was a message, a redefinition of power, hierarchy, and loyalty within the monarchy. It was a message that Meghan Markle, despite her global fame and influence, would not remain untouched. Could this be framed as an act of fairness, or was it a strategic move by Kate to consolidate influence and redefine the family's public image? Every question raised a dozen more. The palace had become a chessboard, and every move carried the weight of history. From the public's perspective, Meghan's journey seemed almost cinematic. An American actress, she married into one of the most storied families in the world, embracing a role that demanded elegance, diplomacy, and restraint. She charmed the Commonwealth, appeared on the cover of countless magazines, and became a symbol of modernity within the royal framework. But fame, influence, and goodwill cannot always shield one from institutional change. Titles, as history reminds us, are fragile things, symbols of status, yet entirely contingent on the shifting sands of duty and perception. And in this moment, Meghan found herself at a crossroads. Either adapt to a system that no longer fully embraced her, or risk losing everything she had worked to achieve in her royal life. The emotional gravity of losing a title is not simply symbolic. It cuts deep into identity. To be a duchess is to hold a place not only in public imagination, but in history books. It is a validation, a recognition of one's role and responsibility within a centuries-old lineage. For Meghan, this wasn't just about ceremonial prestige. It was about legitimacy, belonging, and the narrative of her own life. How do you reconcile the loss of a title with the reality of public expectation, media scrutiny, and familial loyalty? How do you navigate the complex network of power, affection, and betrayal that such an announcement ignites? These are not hypothetical questions. They were her lived reality, unfolding in real time as the palace grappled with its own definitions of duty and tradition. And yet, as shocking as the announcement was, there was a larger context at play. The monarchy, an institution deeply rooted in protocol and ceremony, has long struggled to balance tradition with modernity. Public expectations have shifted, scrutiny has intensified, and the personal choices of individual royals have increasingly collided with institutional imperatives. Kate's declaration was presented as a modernization effort, a way to streamline roles and responsibilities and align the monarchy with contemporary expectations. But behind closed doors, it was a high-stakes gamble, a test of loyalty, judgment, and family cohesion. The question lingering in every corner of the palace was simple yet profound. Could the monarchy survive a public reckoning with its own outdated structures? And what would be the cost to those caught in the middle? Meanwhile, Meghan's personal life and career choices had already placed her at a distance from traditional royal expectations. She pursued philanthropic endeavors, invested in media and production projects, and maintained a lifestyle that blended private ambition with public duty in unconventional ways. From a palace perspective, this independence may have been admirable, even commendable, but it also introduced a conflict. A royal who is not actively serving cannot, by the new rules, retain the trappings of title. It is a cold logic, seemingly impartial, yet laden with emotional consequence. For Meghan, it meant a confrontation not only with the institution but with herself, her identity, her aspirations, and her relationship with the family she had married into. The announcement also ignited a media frenzy. Headlines blazed across screens and newspapers. Meghan at risk, Kate takes charge, royal modernization, title revoked. Social media exploded with debates, opinions, and analyses. Supporters rallied in Meghan's favor, pointing to her charitable work, public service, and global influence. Critics questioned her commitment, her choices, and her understanding of duty. The palace, accustomed to managing narratives with calculated discretion, now faced a storm it could neither fully control nor contain. And through it all, Meghan's story became emblematic of a broader tension between personal agency and institutional expectation, a narrative that would captivate audiences worldwide. And what of the family dynamics? Prince William, heir to the throne, stood at the intersection of loyalty, duty, and personal relationships. King Charles, navigating his own legacy and public perception, weighed the implications of the decision on succession, unity, and the monarchy's image. Kate, poised and deliberate, emerged as a central figure in this high-stakes recalibration. Each decision, each reaction, each whispered conversation carried implications far beyond the immediate moment. Every word, every gesture, became a potential flashpoint, a moment that could alter alliances, relationships, and history itself. Yet the most compelling question remained: how would Meghan respond? Faced with the prospect of losing a title that had defined her royal identity, with media scrutiny at a fever pitch and familial relationships under strain, Meghan's choices would reverberate through history. Would she accept the decision gracefully or challenge it publicly? Would she retreat into private life or leverage her influence to redefine her role outside the palace walls? And in a narrative that blends power, family, tradition, and ambition, the consequences of her actions could not be predicted with certainty. And so, as we step into this story, the stakes are clear. This is not just a tale of protocol or ceremony. It is a drama of identity, power, and ambition. It is a story of how one announcement, delivered with poise and precision, can unsettle an entire institution. And as Meghan Markle navigates the turbulent waters ahead, every move, every decision, every revelation will shape not only her future, but the future of the monarchy itself. Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, had always been seen as the epitome of calm, poise, and measured influence within the royal family. Publicly, she appeared unflappable. The smile that charmed millions, the composed posture that conveyed dignity, the seamless way she balanced motherhood, philanthropy, and royal engagements. But behind the palace doors, there was strategy at work, deliberate, calculated, and unprecedented. On that fateful day, Kate made a declaration that would set in motion one of the most dramatic moments in modern royal history. And at the center of it all was Meghan Markle. Imagine the scene: a quiet morning in Buckingham Palace. The corridors echoed with the soft shuffle of advisors, aides, and secretaries. The senior royals had convened in a private chamber, a space steeped in centuries of tradition. Documents lay on polished oak tables, murmurs filled the room, and the tension was palpable. Kate, standing with her usual grace, addressed the gathered group with a calm that belied the seismic announcement she was about to deliver. To modernize the monarchy, she said, titles will now be held only by those royals actively serving the crown. At first glance, it seemed straightforward. Modernize, streamline, and clarify. But the implications were anything but simple. In that single sentence, Meghan Markle's status as a working royal was called into question. After stepping back from official duties, pursuing independent projects, and living part of her life outside the palace walls, she now fell squarely into the category of those deemed ineligible for title retention. For Meghan, this was more than a bureaucratic adjustment. It was a direct challenge to her identity and legacy within the royal family. Palace insiders later described the announcement as both shocking and deliberate. Kate, they said, was methodical in her approach, understanding that every word, every gesture, and every pause would be scrutinized. It was not only a message to Meghan but also to the entire monarchy. Tradition must evolve, and those who do not actively serve may not retain the privileges and honors they once held. This was a turning point, a moment that blended familial influence with institutional reform. The reaction within the room was immediate and electric. Some courtiers whispered anxiously, aware that such a move would ripple far beyond the palace walls. Advisors glanced at one another, calculating how to manage media narratives, public perception, and potential backlash. King Charles, present for the discussions, weighed the decision carefully, balancing his desire for modernization with the practical realities of family dynamics. And somewhere in the royal network, Prince William observed quietly, recognizing both the necessity and the explosive potential of Kate's announcement. For Meghan, the news was devastating. Though she had anticipated that her choice to step back from full-time royal duties might have consequences, the speed and clarity of this declaration left her unprepared. Imagine being told that a title you had earned, a role that had defined your public identity, could be invalidated. Not through scandal or misconduct, but through a rule she had no opportunity to influence. The sting was personal, professional, and deeply public all at once. Her advisors scrambled, her publicist prepared statements, and her inner circle debated strategy. How to respond? How to frame this in the public eye without appearing petty, weak, or confrontational? This announcement was about more than Meghan. It was a message to the world. Kate Middleton, in her poised and understated way, had reasserted control over the narrative of the monarchy. By framing it as a modernization effort, she aligned herself with the public's desire for efficiency, transparency, and relevance, while simultaneously shifting attention away from traditional debates over nepotism, privilege, and family conflict. It was subtle but powerful, a strategic repositioning that spoke volumes without raising her voice. But the palace was divided. While Kate presented the announcement with calm authority, others saw the move as controversial. Senior advisors worried about the optics. A duchess stripped of her title in an age of social media outrage could lead to public backlash, media speculation, and a prolonged narrative that might overshadow the monarchy's intended modernization. Some feared it would appear punitive, targeting Meghan personally rather than applying universally. Yet Kate remained steadfast, emphasizing fairness, tradition, and the necessity of active engagement for royal title holders. Her position was clear. Roles come with responsibilities, and privileges must be earned and maintained. The announcement, once made, could not be undone. Meghan's title, by the new rules, was no longer secure. This fact sent shockwaves not only through her inner circle, but also across the media landscape. Journalists immediately began analyzing the implications, historians dissected precedents, and royal commentators speculated about the future. Headlines blared across global networks. Kate reshapes monarchy. Meghan at risk of losing title. Royal modernization sends shockwaves. Social media erupted with debates, memes, and viral videos dissecting every nuance of the announcement. Supporters of Meghan cried foul, citing her contributions and public service. Critics argued that titles must be linked to duty, not celebrity or influence. Even within the royal family, reactions were complex. Prince William reportedly understood the rationale, but also recognized the delicate balance between duty and family loyalty. King Charles, conscious of legacy, weighed modernization against public perception. And Meghan herself faced a stark reality. Her identity, her public persona, and her place in history were suddenly at stake. What had been a life of privilege and influence was now clouded by uncertainty, scrutiny, and an unspoken question. How far would the family go to enforce these new rules? As news of the announcement spread, Meghan's supporters mobilized, creating an immediate narrative of sympathy and injustice. The public fascination with her story, long fueled by media attention and cultural relevance, now intersected with the drama of palace politics. Experts debated the legality and legitimacy of the title removal, the historical precedent for such a move, and the potential fallout for future generations. Would other non-working royals face the same scrutiny? How would this reshape the monarchy's image in an age of heightened accountability and public expectation? The tension between public perception and private strategy became the defining feature of this moment. On one side, the monarchy projected calm, reasoned reform. On the other, Meghan's reality was fraught with personal anguish, professional uncertainty, and a media storm that showed no signs of abating. In this intricate web of duty, ambition, and family loyalty, Kate's announcement was both a catalyst and a symbol, a declaration that the monarchy would evolve, but that evolution came at a personal cost to those who did not meet its new standards. And yet, even as the palace moved to manage the fallout, one question lingered: how would Meghan respond? Would she accept this unprecedented move quietly, retreating from public life to protect her dignity? Or would she fight, publicly and fiercely, against what many saw as an unfair and targeted decision? The answer would not only determine her own legacy, but could also redefine the balance of power within one of the world's most enduring institutions. The first chapter of this story ends with a stark realization: the announcement was only the beginning. What seemed like a simple modernization rule had triggered a chain reaction of emotions, calculations, and strategic moves that no one could fully predict. Meghan's future as a titled member of the royal family hung in the balance, while Kate's calculated assertion of influence had already begun to reshape the narrative surrounding the monarchy. And as courtiers whispered, advisors debated, and the public reacted in real time, one thing was clear: the drama was far from over. When Kate Middleton made her announcement, few outside the palace truly understood the weight of her words. Only royals who actively serve the crown will retain their titles. On paper, it sounded administrative, almost mundane. But for Meghan Markle, it was seismic, a rule that cut straight to the heart of her identity and legacy. What did it really mean to actively serve the crown? Who decided what counted as service? And more importantly, how would this rule reshape the monarchy itself? Historically, royal titles have been both symbolic and functional. Dukes, duchesses, princes, and princesses carried responsibilities, official duties, ceremonial appearances, charitable patronages, and, most importantly, the implicit promise of service to the crown and the people. Over centuries, these roles evolved, often influenced by politics, personal whims, or scandal. But in modern times, the expectations became codified, increasingly tied to visibility, influence, and active participation. And it was precisely here that Meghan found herself vulnerable. The palace insiders explained that active service wasn't just about attending galas or waving from balconies. It was about being present, accountable, and aligned with the institution's objectives. Sponsoring charities? Yes, but only if done under the royal banner. Public speaking engagements? Yes, but only if officially sanctioned. Hollywood projects, private philanthropy outside royal endorsement, even global influence, these were all gray areas. Meghan's independent projects, however celebrated by the public, fell squarely into a category deemed unofficial. The message was subtle but unforgiving. Influence outside the institution didn't equate to service within it. Imagine the confusion and frustration this must have caused. Meghan, a woman celebrated worldwide for her intelligence, compassion, and initiative, suddenly faced a definition of service that felt narrow, even exclusionary. She had dedicated years to causes, public campaigns, and humanitarian projects, yet these efforts were effectively devalued by a rule she had no part in shaping. The distinction between being a working royal and simply being a royal became painfully clear, and it was a line she had inadvertently crossed. Her title, her identity as the Duchess of Sussex, now teetered on the edge of invalidation. The rules themselves were not universally applied in recent history. Prince Harry, though still a working royal at the time of the announcement, had already carved a path that occasionally blurred boundaries between personal projects and official duties. He had engaged in global humanitarian efforts, founded charitable organizations, and participated in public campaigns outside strict royal oversight. Yet the perception had always been that he remained, at least symbolically, an active part of the crown. Meghan, by contrast, had stepped back entirely, creating an undeniable contrast in application. And Kate's announcement underscored this distinction, consciously or not, making the rules feel pointed and, to some, punitive. Public perception played a critical role. Social media erupted with debates about fairness, relevance, and gender dynamics. Supporters of Meghan argued that active service should encompass more than ceremonial appearances, that influence, advocacy, and public impact should count. Critics countered that titles carry responsibilities, not just influence, and that the monarchy, as an institution, cannot bend to individual ambitions. The debate spilled into newspapers, podcasts, and televised news segments. Legal experts and royal historians weighed in, dissecting letters patent, previous precedents, and constitutional expectations. Every opinion added fuel to a fire that had already begun to burn. Inside the palace, the conversations were far more strategic and tense. Advisors debated the optics. Could enforcing the active royal rule be framed as modernization without alienating public sympathies? How would Meghan respond publicly, privately, or legally? Would this move destabilize relationships between siblings-in-law? And critically, how would it affect the perception of the monarchy in the eyes of the Commonwealth and the world? Every decision required balancing tradition, modernity, and personal loyalty, a delicate act that could tip either toward stability or scandal. Meghan's personal reaction was a mixture of disbelief and calculated concern. Losing a title isn't just symbolic. It's tangible. It affects legal privileges, public perception, historical legacy, and emotional identity. A title validates your place within a centuries-old institution. It grants access, respect, and authority. To have that suddenly threatened is not merely a bureaucratic inconvenience. It is an existential challenge. Meghan now faced a complex emotional equation: grief for the loss, frustration at the perceived unfairness, and strategic calculation for the next steps. Could she negotiate, protest, or appeal? And if so, how would that be perceived by the family, the institution, and the public? The rule also raised questions about precedent. Would other non-working royals be evaluated under the same criteria? Could this move impact future generations, ensuring that only those fully integrated into official duties retained their titles? And if the definition of active service became too rigid, would the monarchy risk alienating individuals whose influence, although indirect, still benefited the institution? Each question revealed layers of complexity and potential controversy, showing that Kate's announcement was more than just a single statement. It was the opening move in a high-stakes negotiation over the monarchy's future. At the same time, the emotional ramifications were profound. Meghan, accustomed to public adoration and media respect, now faced scrutiny and judgment. Headlines questioned her commitment to duty. Critics highlighted her Hollywood career, and allies within the palace feared the personal fallout. It was a perfect storm, a convergence of institutional expectation, personal ambition, public opinion, and family dynamics. And at the eye of that storm was a duchess whose life had already been the subject of relentless attention and speculation. Yet the story also revealed contradictions within the monarchy itself. The institution is built on centuries of tradition, yet must adapt to contemporary realities. Active service, while seemingly clear in principle, is subjective in practice. The rules, while presented as impartial, inevitably intersect with human relationships, biases, and power dynamics. In Meghan's case, the rule became both a mechanism of modernization and a tool of control, blurring the lines between fairness and strategy. It highlighted the tension between personal identity and institutional expectation, a tension that every royal, past and present, must navigate. And perhaps most crucially, the rule placed Meghan in a position of choice. She could accept the new definition, adjust her role, and attempt to maintain influence within the framework of official duties. Or she could resist, challenge, and redefine her path outside the institution. Each option carried profound consequences. Acceptance might preserve public goodwill, but at the cost of personal autonomy. Resistance could assert independence, but risk alienation, media scrutiny, and legal complications. The stakes were not hypothetical. They were immediate, pressing, and deeply personal. As the palace processed the announcement and the media amplified its implications, Meghan's story became a lens through which the world viewed the evolving monarchy. Supporters framed her as a modern, independent woman caught in the crossfire of outdated traditions. Critics painted a picture of entitlement and misalignment with institutional responsibility. Meanwhile, Kate's role as arbiter, strategist, and influencer of public perception became increasingly clear. She was not merely delivering a rule. She was shaping the monarchy's narrative for decades to come. And yet, even after the rule was articulated, questions remained. How strictly would it be enforced? What exceptions, if any, would be made? How would Meghan respond privately? And how would the public react as the story unfolded? The answers were unclear, setting the stage for a drama that would unfold across private chambers, public stages, and media platforms alike. The rule of active service, simple in its wording, carried layers of consequence, strategy, and emotion. For Meghan Markle, it was a turning point. A line drawn, a challenge issued, and a crisis emerging from the very institution she had joined with hope and dedication. What she did next would determine not only her fate, but the public perception of the monarchy in the modern era. And as the palace waited, the tension hung thick. Would the rule be enforced? Would Meghan comply, resist, or redefine her role entirely? Meghan Markle had always been a woman defined by action. From her early days as an actress in Hollywood to her later work as an advocate for women's rights, she thrived on making an impact. She was not content to sit quietly in the shadows of royal life, but stepping back from official duties, as she and Prince Harry had chosen to do, created a new reality, one that now, in light of Kate Middleton's announcement, threatened the very essence of her royal identity. Imagine dedicating yourself to public service, philanthropy, and charitable causes, only to have those efforts dismissed because they exist outside a very specific framework. For Meghan, this was not just an administrative oversight, it was deeply personal. She had poured her energy into projects that mattered, initiatives for gender equality, mental health advocacy, and global humanitarian work. She had leveraged her public profile to raise awareness, fund programs, and inspire change. To the public, these were achievements that defined her as a modern, influential figure. But in the eyes of the palace rulemakers, they did not constitute active service under the crown's new definition. Her day-to-day life had become a balancing act between private ambition and public expectation. She maintained a rigorous schedule, managing production deals, speaking engagements, and charitable initiatives, while navigating the relentless scrutiny of tabloids, paparazzi, and social media. Every move was dissected, every handshake, smile, and speech interpreted as either loyalty or defiance. For someone who had once been accustomed to relative anonymity, this was an extraordinary shift. The loss of official duties did not mean a loss of responsibility. In fact, it often amplified it. Meghan's every action was now magnified, interpreted, and judged in ways that were simultaneously unfair and inescapable. Yet despite stepping away from full-time royal work, Meghan had continued to represent values that aligned with the monarchy's public image, grace, diplomacy, and charitable engagement. She hosted events, supported initiatives, and made appearances that, while unofficial, were impactful. From humanitarian trips abroad to engagements supporting women's empowerment, her footprint was undeniable. But the palace's rules were rigid. Influence outside sanctioned activities did not equal service. It was a stark and painful reality, underscoring the gulf between public perception and institutional definition. There was also the personal dimension. Meghan's sense of identity had long been intertwined with her role as Duchess of Sussex. Titles, while symbolic, carried a weight of legitimacy and belonging. They were a tangible acknowledgement of her place within a centuries-old family and institution. The threat of losing that title, not due to misconduct or scandal, but because of a rule she could neither influence nor negotiate, struck at her sense of self. It was a collision of ambition, identity, and circumstance, a moment that tested her resilience, her patience, and her strategic thinking. Social media amplified the tension. Meghan's supporters argued passionately that her work outside official duties was meaningful, transformative, and deserving of recognition. They celebrated her independence, her influence, and her refusal to be confined by outdated norms. Critics countered that the monarchy was a structured institution and that personal projects could not override institutional expectations. The conversation became a global debate, with hashtags trending across continents, news outlets analyzing minute details of her schedule, and commentators dissecting the implications for both her and the crown. Every post, article, and headline became another layer of pressure, another test of Meghan's ability to navigate a high-stakes personal and public crisis. Within the palace, reactions were complex. Prince Harry, still closely involved in public duties, understood both the letter and spirit of the rules. Yet he also recognized the emotional toll this change would have on his wife. King Charles, seeking to balance modernization with tradition, saw the strategic necessity but also the potential fallout. And Kate Middleton, by presenting the rule in the way she did, had established both authority and moral high ground, emphasizing fairness, duty, and continuity, while inadvertently, or perhaps intentionally, targeting Meghan's unique position. The family dynamics, already delicate, became further strained. Meghan's personal life outside official duties was not just about projects. It was about establishing autonomy, defining purpose, and building a life that blended her passions with her responsibilities. She had pursued media deals, philanthropic partnerships, and speaking opportunities that reflected her values and priorities. These ventures were significant, providing influence, funding, and visibility. Yet, under the new rule, they were essentially invisible to the institution she had married into. The contrast between impact and recognition, between ambition and legitimacy, became a central tension in her story. This tension also revealed contradictions within public expectations. Audiences celebrated Meghan for being independent, influential, and socially engaged. They admired her ability to speak out, take risks, and pursue causes close to her heart. But those same qualities, when measured against the rigid definition of active royal service, rendered her ineligible for the very title that legitimized her place in the family. It was a paradox, praised for the qualities that made her extraordinary, yet penalized for the way she expressed them. The rules were clear, but their application carried nuance, emotion, and consequence. And so Meghan faced both internal and external pressure. Internally, she grappled with grief, frustration, and a sense of betrayal. Losing a title is not merely symbolic, it is existential. Externally, she navigated a maelstrom of public opinion, media scrutiny, and palace politics. Every decision required strategic calculation: how to respond, when to engage, what to say, and what to withhold. One misstep could redefine her public narrative, alienate supporters, or inflame critics. The stakes were monumental, and the timeline was unforgiving. Yet there was a resilience to Meghan that cannot be understated. She had weathered public criticism, media attacks, and personal challenges before. She understood the power of narrative, the importance of perception, and the value of carefully measured action. Losing a title, while painful, did not erase her influence or diminish her accomplishments. It did, however, force her to confront the stark reality that institutional recognition and personal impact are not always aligned. She was powerful, yes, but in a system that measured worth by titles and formal service, that power came under threat. The chapter also highlights the human side of this struggle. Beyond media attention and palace politics, Meghan was a wife, a mother, and an individual navigating profound change. The personal toll was immense: sleepless nights, private conversations with Harry, discussions with advisors and friends, moments of doubt, and flashes of determination. Every emotion, every reaction, every choice was amplified by the historical significance of her position and the global audience watching her move. It was a crucible, a test of character, strategy, and endurance. And then came the looming question: if she could no longer retain her title under the new rule, what did that mean for her public role, her influence, and her identity? Would she fight, step back entirely, or redefine her place outside the official framework. Each option carried profound consequences: legal complications, public perception battles, and family dynamics that could never be undone. The decisions ahead were not hypothetical. They were immediate, urgent, and laden with emotion. As Meghan's world shifted, it became clear that life outside royal duties was not just a new chapter, it was a battlefield. The very qualities that had made her stand out, the independence, the drive, and the courage to speak out, now placed her at odds with an institution built on hierarchy, tradition, and duty. The tension between autonomy and expectation, personal ambition and institutional rules, public support and private reality, would define her journey in the months and years to come. The palace never sleeps. Even when corridors seem quiet and ceremonial routines proceed without interruption, beneath the polished walls, strategy, whispers, and calculation are constant. Kate Middleton's announcement that only royals actively serving the crown would retain their titles had set off ripples throughout the institution. And as Meghan Markle digested the implications, the palace itself stirred, alive with speculation, analysis, and subtle tension. Imagine Buckingham Palace in those moments. Aides scuttling between offices with urgent papers, senior advisors convening in hushed voices, courtiers exchanging cautious glances. The air was thick with uncertainty. No one doubted the legitimacy of Kate's announcement, yet everyone understood the potential fallout. The decision was unprecedented in its clarity and impact. It had not only defined the parameters of royal duty, but had also drawn an unmistakable line in the sand. Meghan Markle's title, once unassailable, was now under threat. Sources within the palace described a complex network of reactions. Some officials felt relief, believing that clarifying who counts as an active royal was necessary for modernization. Others were wary, knowing that such a move could destabilize relationships, inflame media scrutiny, and provoke public debate. Every courted perception had to be considered. How would Commonwealth countries react? How would the British public respond? Could this decision be framed as fair, progressive, and consistent with tradition? King Charles, balancing his role as sovereign with that of father and grandfather, found himself in the eye of the storm. Reports suggest he understood the rationale behind Kate's declaration, yet he also recognized the delicate human element. Meghan and Harry were no ordinary royals. They were public figures with global influence, immense popularity, and media clout. Charles knew that enforcing the rule without careful messaging could result in a public relations disaster. But failing to uphold it risked undermining the monarchy's credibility. The tension was palpable: duty versus diplomacy, tradition versus modernity, institution versus individual. Prince William, too, had his own perspective. Positioned as the future king, William was acutely aware of his responsibility to uphold the monarchy's reputation while maintaining family cohesion. Yet Kate's bold stance placed him in a complicated position. On one hand, it reinforced the idea of merit-based recognition within the royal framework, a principle aligned with his vision for a modernized monarchy. On the other hand, it threatened to create divisions between him, his brother, and Meghan, complicating family dynamics already strained by past controversies. Every conversation, every gesture, every glance had implications that extended far beyond the palace walls. The immediate reaction among courtiers was a mixture of concern, anticipation, and calculated support. Advisors debated messaging strategies, anticipating the inevitable media scrutiny. They analyzed historical precedents, searching for guidance in centuries of royal behavior. Some suggested framing the decision as modernization and efficiency. Others warned that the public might interpret it as personal targeting. Every step required precision. Even a small misstatement could cascade into headlines that questioned the monarchy's fairness, impartiality, and unity. Media insiders quickly picked up on the tension. Royal correspondents noted unusual activity, increased communications from the palace press office, closed-door meetings with advisors, and careful coordination of statements. Every action suggested that the monarchy was aware of the stakes and preparing to manage the narrative. Yet, even the most carefully crafted communications could not fully control public perception. Social media had become an unrelenting force, where rumors, opinions, and viral narratives moved faster than any official statement could contain. At the same time, the palace faced internal calculations about loyalty and alignment. Who within the institution would support Kate's interpretation of the rules? Who might sympathize with Meghan and Harry? These internal alliances were critical, as they would influence both the enforcement of the rule and the management of public messaging. Courtiers and advisors had to navigate a web of personal relationships, historical loyalties, and professional obligations, often simultaneously. Every decision, even minor, could shift the balance of influence and perception. For Meghan, the palace reaction was both illuminating and intimidating. The very fact that Kate's announcement had triggered widespread coordination, scrutiny, and debate underscored its significance. It was no longer simply a policy change. It was a statement of power, a measure of influence, and a reflection of the shifting dynamics within the family. Meghan saw, perhaps for the first time, just how deeply institutional priorities could intersect with personal ambition, and how carefully the palace managed every message, impression, and interaction. The reaction was not limited to strategy and messaging. Emotion ran high. Sources describe tense expressions, whispered exchanges, and discreet consultations in the private chambers. The announcement had not merely legal and procedural implications. It carried personal weight, touching on identity, loyalty, and legacy. The palace, as an institution, was adept at managing appearances, but managing emotions, especially those of a high-profile member like Meghan, was far more delicate. Emotions can be unpredictable, and in this case, the emotional stakes were amplified by years of media scrutiny, public expectation, and historical precedent. Observers outside the palace could sense the tension through the subtle cues. Changes in public appearances, carefully staged photo ops, and selective engagement with media. Analysts noted patterns: delays in event participation, controlled statements emphasizing fairness and modernization, and an emphasis on unity and continuity. Behind the polished exterior, however, the palace was navigating a crisis. Each move was a test. Could the monarchy maintain its dignity while addressing an unprecedented challenge? Could relationships survive the strain imposed by both policy and perception? And yet, amid the tension, there were contradictions. The palace, an institution steeped in tradition, had always prided itself on stability and continuity. Yet modernization required bold action, decisiveness, and occasionally, confrontation. Kate's announcement exemplified this paradox. A decision presented as logical and procedural carried undeniable personal and political implications. The palace had to reconcile these competing priorities: loyalty versus reform, duty versus family, precedent versus innovation, while keeping the public narrative favorable. Meanwhile, Meghan's allies watched with growing concern. Advisors, friends, and supporters feared that the palace's coordinated reaction could marginalize her, framing her actions and decisions in ways that undermined her credibility. Legal counsel analyzed potential implications, strategists considered public relations angles, and confidants debated the best course of action. Every detail mattered, from the timing of statements to the subtleties of tone, reflecting the high-stakes nature of the unfolding drama. Even as the palace managed reactions, the broader public was captivated. Headlines circulated, social media debates flared, and every move by Meghan, Kate, and other senior royals was scrutinized. Analysts discussed the implications of active service, historical precedents for title retention, and the potential fallout for future generations. The narrative was no longer confined to palace walls. It had become a global spectacle, with millions of eyes trained on every interaction, statement, and appearance. And just when it seemed that the palace had calculated every potential consequence, an unexpected development emerged. A leak, a subtle, almost imperceptible slip, hinted at deeper tensions, private disagreements, and perhaps even resentment beneath the surface of unity. This leak, small as it was, became a spark, hinting at battles brewing behind closed doors and setting the stage for conflicts that could reverberate far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. The palace reaction, in short, was a microcosm of the drama at play: careful strategy, emotional tension, political calculation, and the ever-present challenge of public perception. It revealed how the institution balances the competing demands of tradition, modernization, family, and influence, and how one decision, made with poise and authority, could trigger cascading consequences. For Meghan, it was a moment of stark realization. The palace was not only an institution of ceremony and history, it was a living, breathing entity capable of influence, resistance, and, at times, profound personal consequence. The news had reached Meghan in the quiet of her private residence, yet the silence offered no comfort. Titles, legacy, influence, these were not mere words. They were entwined with her identity, her history, and the narrative she had built around her life. And now, the institution she had married into, represented by Kate Middleton's announcement, had effectively challenged everything she stood for within the royal family. The weight of that realization was immediate, palpable, and deeply personal. Imagine being Meghan in that moment. The world expected composure, grace, and resilience. Every movement she made, every word she spoke, could be amplified, dissected, and scrutinized. A misplaced gesture could become fodder for tabloids. A misstep in tone could inflame public debate. Yet beneath the poise, a storm raged, a mixture of disbelief, anger, hurt, and strategic calculation. How had it come to this? She had followed the rules, stepped back gracefully, maintained dignity, and yet, her very title was now in jeopardy. Privately, Meghan's first reactions were raw and human. She confided in her closest advisors and confidants, articulating a mix of frustration and sorrow. Losing a title is more than a symbolic loss. It is an erasure of recognition, of belonging, of legitimacy within a system that defines not only your public role, but also your historical place. Every ounce of her preparation for public life, every strategic move she had made, suddenly felt threatened by a rule she had not created and could not control. Friends described her as composed but visibly tense. She moved through her day methodically, reviewing legal documents, preparing statements, and consulting with advisors. Each decision required careful weighing. What could be disclosed publicly, what had to remain private, and what strategy would preserve both dignity and influence. The stakes were monumental. Public perception, media narratives, family relationships, all were in delicate balance. A single misstep could compromise decades of effort, influence, and reputation. Legal advisors were called in, analyzing the implications of Kate's announcement. Was there precedent for revoking a title based solely on lack of active service? Could Meghan contest the decision through legal channels, or was the monarchy's authority absolute in these matters? Every clause, every nuance of letters patent and historical precedent was scrutinized. Strategists debated how to frame the narrative should she choose to respond publicly. The complexity of the situation was staggering. Legal, emotional, and political dimensions were intertwined in ways that made any decision fraught with consequence. At the same time, Meghan's publicist began crafting messaging to protect her image. While the palace had framed the announcement as modernization, the optics for Meghan were stark. A beloved public figure, widely celebrated for her humanitarian efforts, potentially losing her royal title due to a procedural rule. Social media supporters rallied immediately, questioning the fairness of the rule, praising her accomplishments, and expressing solidarity. Critics, however, emphasized duty and institutional loyalty, portraying her as someone who had willingly stepped away from responsibilities. The tension between these narratives created a pressure cooker environment, demanding a response that balanced tact, assertiveness, and public perception. But beyond strategy, there was emotional weight. Meghan faced not only the external pressures of public opinion and palace politics, but also the internal struggle of personal disappointment and perceived betrayal. Titles are not merely ceremonial. They validate presence, contribution, and belonging. The potential loss of her title felt like a negation of years of effort, adaptation, and public service. For someone who had invested so much of herself in both personal projects and the institution she married into, this was a profound blow. Family dynamics further complicated her response. Prince Harry, while supportive, was navigating his own position as a royal figure with obligations and public expectations. Their shared desire to protect family unity clashed with the reality of institutional rules. Conversations between Meghan and Harry reportedly ranged from strategic planning to emotional venting, moments of vulnerability interspersed with meticulous analysis. Allies within the family, while sympathetic, also recognized the need for careful handling. Any overt resistance could escalate tensions and magnify public scrutiny. Even the physical spaces Meghan occupied became arenas of contemplation and decision-making. Private rooms, long walks through gardens, and quiet conversations with close advisors provided moments of reflection. She weighed every option: acceptance, negotiation, or public challenge. Each choice carried ramifications not only for her own future, but for the broader perception of the monarchy. Every potential action was fraught with consequence, and yet, inaction was equally perilous. Public opinion added another layer of complexity. The world was watching. Millions had followed her journey from Hollywood to royal life, from public engagements to private initiatives. Her every decision was subject to global interpretation. Supporters demanded fairness, recognition, and respect for her contributions. Critics questioned commitment, authority, and alignment with institutional expectations. Navigating this polarized landscape required not only strategic thinking, but emotional resilience, patience, and foresight. Reports suggest that Meghan's private response was a blend of calculated planning and emotional realism. She recognized the importance of maintaining dignity, protecting her public image, and safeguarding family relationships. At the same time, she felt the sting of perceived injustice, the frustration of limitations imposed on her role, and the awareness that her influence was being circumscribed by definitions she had no control over. This duality, strategic and emotional, defined her private response. Yet, even as she formulated her approach, an undercurrent of anticipation lingered. Meghan understood that the palace, with its centuries of tradition, rarely acted without calculation. Every message, every gesture, every announcement was part of a broader strategy. Her private response, therefore, was not merely reactionary, it was anticipatory. She had to consider the palace's next move, potential media framing, and the evolving narrative of her life in both public and private spheres. The emotional stakes extended beyond strategy. Meghan's sense of self, her understanding of her place in the royal family, and her aspirations were all intertwined with the title that now hung in jeopardy. To lose it would be to face a symbolic and practical redefinition of her life. For someone accustomed to agency, influence, and visibility, this was a moment that demanded resilience, reflection, and decisive action. And as Meghan navigated this private turbulence, an unexpected twist emerged. A subtle leak, a private conversation made public, hinted at fissures within the palace, disagreements, differing loyalties, and tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface. The revelation added pressure, uncertainty, and urgency. The landscape of her challenge had grown more complex, blending personal, institutional, and public dimensions in ways she could not have anticipated. Her private response, therefore, became a balancing act. She had to maintain composure, protect relationships, and strategize for the long term, all while managing immediate emotional and reputational consequences. Every move mattered, every decision carried weight, and every action had the potential to alter not only her trajectory, but the monarchy's public image. Within hours of Kate Middleton's announcement, the story had erupted into a global media frenzy. Headlines splashed across newspapers, websites, and television screens. Meghan Markle at risk of losing royal title. Kate modernizes monarchy. Duchess of Sussex faces unprecedented challenge. Social media, with its relentless speed and virality, amplified every nuance, every speculation, and every interpretation of the palace decision. The world was watching, dissecting, debating, and, in many cases, taking sides. Imagine the pressure on Meghan. The private emotional turbulence she was experiencing collided with the unrelenting gaze of millions of people. Every gesture, every statement, and even silence could be interpreted in countless ways. Public perception, shaped by the media, was now an additional battleground. Analysts, pundits, and commentators dissected every aspect of her life, her choices, and her relationship with the royal family. The narrative had shifted from a personal and institutional matter into a global spectacle. Traditional media outlets approached the story with urgency and drama. Royal correspondents highlighted the unprecedented nature of Kate's announcement and speculated on Meghan's next steps. Headlines used words like shock, crisis, and upheaval, emphasizing the tension and uncertainty surrounding the Duchess of Sussex. Newspapers explored historical precedents, comparing Meghan's situation to previous royals who had stepped back from duties or faced similar scrutiny. Talk shows debated whether she would comply, contest, or redefine her role entirely. Meanwhile, social media became a storm of polarized opinions. Hashtags trended, memes circulated, and commentary ranged from sympathetic support to sharp criticism. Meghan's supporters argued passionately that her contributions, both as a public figure and in her philanthropic work, were undervalued and unfairly excluded from the new definition of active royal. Critics framed her as someone who had willingly stepped away from duties and now faced the consequences. The digital landscape amplified every perception, creating pressure that extended far beyond palace walls. The viral nature of the coverage also had personal ramifications. Friends and confidants of Meghan observed the relentless attention with concern. Supporters flooded her social media with messages of solidarity, while critics debated every move she had made over the past decade. Every appearance, statement, and engagement was scrutinized and often misinterpreted, contributing to an atmosphere of relentless intensity. The media frenzy became a feedback loop where public opinion influenced reporting and reporting fueled public opinion, creating a cycle that was nearly impossible to control. Palace strategists quickly recognized the need for careful messaging. Every media outlet, every viral clip, and every headline needed to be managed in a way that preserved the monarchy's reputation while also mitigating public backlash. Coordinated statements, carefully timed appearances, and nuanced interviews were all considered tools in shaping the narrative. Behind the scenes, courtiers and advisors worked tirelessly, aware that a single misstep could escalate the situation and magnify public scrutiny. Yet despite meticulous planning, the story was unpredictable. Media narratives were influenced not only by official statements, but also by leaks, speculation, and the sheer intensity of public interest. Analysts noted patterns. Some coverage leaned sympathetic toward Meghan, highlighting her charitable work and global influence. Other reporting emphasized her separation from royal duties and framed the announcement as a necessary enforcement of institutional rules. The duality of the coverage reflected the tension between public admiration and institutional expectation, creating a volatile media environment. The speed of the media's response also meant that every minor detail could become amplified. A casual comment by an aide, a seemingly innocuous photograph, or an unguarded moment in public appearance could spark headlines, memes, and viral discussion. Meghan's every move was monitored, creating a pressure cooker environment where private decisions became public events. Even routine activities, from charity visits to casual interviews, were subject to scrutiny and interpretation, amplifying the emotional stakes she already faced. Media framing extended beyond traditional reporting. Opinion columns, podcasts, and social media influencers contributed to the narrative, often blurring the line between fact and interpretation. Discussions of fairness, modernization, and personal agency proliferated, engaging global audiences in debates about gender, power, and the evolving role of monarchy in the modern era. The intensity of coverage created a climate where public perception could influence institutional decisions, and vice versa, making Meghan's response both critical and complicated. Legal experts and royal commentators were also drawn into the frenzy. They examined historical documents, letters patent, and prior examples of title removal to speculate on Meghan's options and potential outcomes. Analysts debated the enforceability of the new rule, the likelihood of public pushback, and the strategic implications for future royal generations. The discussion became a mixture of legal reasoning, historical context, and cultural commentary, all fueled by the urgency of the unfolding media storm. At the same time, Meghan's supporters mobilized to influence the narrative. Public campaigns, petitions, and social media activism highlighted her accomplishments, contributions, and advocacy. Influencers framed her as a modern, independent, and socially conscious royal whose efforts transcended ceremonial duties. Critics countered by emphasizing adherence to institutional rules, portraying her as someone who had opted out of responsibilities and therefore faced the consequences. The clash of perspectives intensified the frenzy, making the media landscape a complex and unpredictable environment. Within the palace, the media frenzy was both a challenge and a tool. Strategic communication teams monitored coverage, assessed public sentiment, and adjusted messaging to maintain control over the narrative. Leaks were sometimes managed to preempt speculation, while official statements emphasized modernization, fairness, and duty. Yet despite careful coordination, the intensity and speed of the media's response meant that no message could fully contain public interpretation. The story had taken on a life of its own, fueled by curiosity, emotion, and the enduring fascination with royal drama. The media frenzy also highlighted the paradox of Meghan's situation. She was celebrated for independence, influence, and public service, qualities that had elevated her globally. Yet those same qualities, when measured against the rigid definition of active royal, rendered her vulnerable to losing her title. The media, by amplifying every angle, every perspective, and every speculation, underscored the tension between personal accomplishment and institutional expectation. Meghan's private struggles were now mirrored, magnified, and debated.